Welcome back to another episode of Rock Boys Football Dill. Another Monday afternoon, another time to update the top 25 power rankings heading into next week until it's been a wild college football season. There's been significant changes every single week to the top 25, and I'm sure next Monday we're going to have some more significant changes. Fired up to get into not only the top 25 rankings, but also get into a conversation of what do the tiers in the college football landscape kind of look like? Not sure if I love the tiers that I created. I'm sure you don't as well. So we'll get into that. Now, before we do it, as always, I'm sure many of y'all, including you, Dill, got some problems with my top 25. Let it fly in the comment section. That by far the best part about doing this is just the college football discussion that takes place in the comment section. Appreciate you guys rocking with it. If y'all do enjoy the content, consider subscribing to the channel. And Dill, without further ado, let's get into this one. I want to start at the top. Like this is probably a hot take having Ohio State number 2, because you look at the AP poll, you look at a lot of other people's top 25 and say Ohio State close to that number 4 range. The reason I have Oregon's clearly 1. The reason I have Ohio State number 2 right now is that you watched that football game between Oregon and Ohio State and tell me that wasn't just an excellently played college football game by both sides that just came down to a few key plays in the fourth quarter. There was a difference, in my opinion, between what you saw from Oregon versus Ohio State as opposed to when you watched the Tennessee-Bama game or you watched the Georgia-Texas game where, yeah, you saw some good things from Tennessee. You saw some good things from Georgia, but it wasn't the cleanest football game that we've seen. I go back to that Oregon-Ohio State game and say, I left that saying those are 2 really good college football teams that have elite talent, but also not many question marks. And for that reason, that's kind of why I have Ohio State at the number 2 spot. And Dill, like, quite frankly, there's probably an argument to be made that we just make a 5th tier and just kind of stick Oregon and Ohio State because you combined not a ton of glaring question marks like we see with some other teams in this top contender category, but they also have that top end talent that makes them bona fide national championship football teams.
Yeah, that is kind of what's being wrestled with in my mind. And frankly, Penn State's probably the only other one that has like the claim that they haven't really shown any weaknesses, I wouldn't say. I think their
Agreed.
offense is taking steps forward. They're playing more explosive, but I still think you got to rely a bit on history and be like, well, we've seen that story from Penn State before. As much as I believe that they're playing at a really high level, I think the defense is about as, I mean, they have an argument for being one of the better units in the country. I still want to see what that offense looks like against really, really good defense. And they'll have their shot to show it. If they play a really good game against Ohio State, even if they lose it, I think they'll have kind of earned their way into that, like, yeah, kind of separating themselves a little bit. But I still want to see it from Penn State because I look like, again, we've seen it before.
Yeah, we've both been burned on the Penn State hype in the past, where it's like this team looks really good, bumps into a Michigan or Ohio State, doesn't look so good. I will say, like, this Penn State team fundamentally different, though. This offense is significantly more explosive than the Penn State offenses that we've seen in the past. Miami's probably another hot take. I think the AP poll has them at number 6. Look, Miami has question marks. Like, I wouldn't put them in that category with Oregon and Ohio State quite yet. The reason I'm higher on Miami than most, yeah, you have question marks specifically in the back end of that defense. That secondary is still coming along. There's 2 things that kind of stand out. One, that pass rush is starting to turn it on, dominated Louisville on Saturday. But I think more importantly, I don't have a question mark about them at quarterback and about the offensive side of the football, where you look at Georgia, question marks, Tennessee, question marks, Texas. We'll get into them, a whole can of question marks after that football game. But I'd rather have my question marks in the back end of a defense than the quarterback position. Like, at the end of the day, Cam Ward, the Miami Hurricanes offense, that's the best quarterback play we're seeing in the country, and quite frankly, the best offense that we see in the country. So I'm a little bit higher on Miami. Dill, almost feels a little bit like LSU last year, where the defense isn't as bad as LSU's was last year, but that's kind of where you have the question marks. If they can figure it out on defense, I'll put them in that top contender the way that Miami Hurricanes offense is playing.
Yeah, no, I'll certainly quibble a little bit with where you have that Miami team because I think you're understating maybe the questions about that defense. And like I'm looking like, I mean, these are not great teams they're playing.
Yeah.
Like Cal is not a very good football team. Virginia Tech, I don't know what to make. They're kind of coming on a little bit.
Might
So
be
there's
good.
maybe a little bit of a pass for that one. But still, like these teams that are scoring on them aren't great teams. And that again, that's like all well and good. And you cannot have your questions until you turn into an LSU. And when you turn into have to week in and week out play shootouts, like I feel like you have a good chance to get nipped more so even than certain teams that just play better defense and like play average if you're maybe a little above
Yeah,
average.
I guess it's just my personal preference. Like I'd rather trust the best quarterback in the country and the best offense in the country than having an elite defense. But hey, you're a Big Ten guy, and so you probably trust a little bit more on the defensive side of the football. Georgia, real quick, my questions about this Georgia offense were not necessarily answered. I like to see that they were leaning on the game a little bit more, but Carson, I think a lot of Georgia fans would agree with this. Like Carson Beck doesn't look like the Carson Beck we saw in 2023. He missed some throws, had some really bad turnovers. If Carson Beck starts to click, that makes this Georgia team extremely dangerous because they whipped Texas on the line of scrimmage. That's the
And
Georgia
honestly, I
defense.
don't want to blame all of it on Carson Beck because I don't think the weapons around him are playing particularly great. They're dropping balls. I don't know that they're running the routes. Like there's just something that's not in sync because like the balls aren't being thrown accurately. But again, I don't know who that's on exactly. Kirby Smart's always up there defending Carson Beck pretty aggressively, I'd say, against the media attack on him. So again, like it might be have something to do with the fact that there is no Lad McConkey or Brock Bowers. So again, it's probably not all on Beck, but that's why I kind of agree with where you kind of have Georgia at. Like, I don't think they're a top 4 team right now until they maybe start proving that they can be consistent on offense and especially not turn the ball over because those turnovers are, I'd say, a very real problem.
And you want to see like a little bit more consistency from this team in general because like the defense was incredible
That
against
might be
Texas
that.
on Saturday night. But then you go back to the first half of Alabama, you go back to that Mississippi State game and say, we still have question marks. So it's like I want to see them stack some more Georgia-esque wins before I'm kind of back on the hype train with this Georgia team.
But now we know that it's in there for that team. And I think, frankly,
Yes,
up until that Texas game, you weren't 100% sure.
Texas.
What are
I
they
just don't.
physically? That's to me where like are they like physically as ready as maybe we thought they were? Like, yeah, they're beating up on Michigan, they're beating up on Oklahoma, some teams that again have
Bad
some very
teams.
deep flaws.
Yeah,
Like Georgia physically just kind of hammered them on both sides of the ball a little bit. Georgia ran the ball really well. Texas couldn't really block Georgia, which I found stunning. I
that
thought this Texas that's kind of what your hope was for this Texas team is that offensive line was so good and it was really good against a very good Michigan front. As much as Michigan has other problems, they still have some hammers on the D line. I was very surprised to see Georgia just kind of take it to them up there.
you got to try to decipher like was that just a bad football game for Texas or are there legitimate questions on the offensive line? Now I tend to lean like bad football game, just like in a big moment with everybody watching, you just didn't play that good. Like we've seen Calvin Banks play very good football, probably his worst football game he's played in a Texas Longhorns jersey. Even Cam Williams on the other side, that was the biggest concern. Is like what the one thing you were super confident with Texas. I was up here last week saying Texas's offensive line is the best in the country. It didn't look nearly like that against Georgia. So you have your question marks about Texas. And again, Tennessee, kind of the same conversation. This Tennessee defense is so legit. Like it's fast, it's disrupted in the front seven. They have a secondary that's much better than we thought it was going to be heading into 2024. That you make no mistake about it is a national championship caliber defense. I would go as far to say I think it's the best defense that we've seen in the country up to this point. That being said, I don't think Nico answered our questions Saturday against Alabama. Like there were throws down the field that he could have made. Now, he turned it up in the second half, which I think should excite a lot of Tennessee fans. I'm just coming from the perspective of like, I want to see it a couple more games consistently before like I'm kind of back on Tennessee being that legitimate contender, not only in the SEC, but for college football playoff championship.
Now, personally, I think you're too low on Tennessee. I think they should probably be 4. I look at them like, again, do I feel comfortable that they can at least slow Miami down? Yeah, and I don't feel comfortable that Miami can really slow them down. I think there's a lot of avenues for Tennessee to hurt that type of team. Again, that's a bit of a flavor thing because that's who would you like, defense versus offense? And
Well,
again, both
Nico's, I
sides.
mean, Miami's blown a bunch of coverages. Tennessee's had a bunch of opportunities to push the ball down the field. Like Nico just ain't making the throws right now. I see where you're coming from though. Like Tennessee's defense, like that can slow Miami down.
They've also just had better wins. I mean, they've beaten some really good teams, I would say. So again, like I'm looking Miami really hasn't done a ton yet until like again, their offense looks awesome. And that's just quibbling with like some small details because frankly, they both have big questions. Like they both certainly are capable teams of winning
I,
national championships. My bigger issue, frankly, is where you have LSU, Texas A&M, and maybe to a
yeah.
lesser extent Clemson. Because Clemson, I still want to see what that offense looks like against a real defense. Again, I like what I'm observing. Like my eyeballs are telling me something's different. They're being more explosive. They got your young wide receivers more involved in that game, and they're playing good, and that's opening up a new avenue to move it. Still want to see them kind of rebound against a good defense compared to what they look like against
Well,
Georgia. But I look at LSU A&M; those two teams are coming alive. They've made some huge corrections. LSU's defense is playing infinitely better than it did earlier in the season. A&M's offensive line is really starting to turn up. They can run the ball on teams. I still have some questions that remain about both of them, but they took some early
would,
losses. I don't know that they should be that far away from a Tennessee or Georgia or Texas,
would you
frankly.
put them up?
I probably would.
So Clemson, I'm with you. Like this was almost like a little bit of a statement, like kind of like plant your flagpole on the ground and be like, I'm a Clemson guy. Um, LSU, you're right. Like that, the Texas A&M and LSU are unique teams where big time question marks coming out of week one, both lost. And then like the trajectory has just been going in the right direction, which you can't say for a lot of these other college football teams. Like you look at some of those teams in the top contender category, I don't know how much they're getting better. You look at LSU and Texas A&M, say they're both teams are getting better at a fast rate. For me, LSU, I just want to see more from the defense. And then Texas A&M, like Connor Wigman had some of those problems that we've seen in the past against Mississippi State, which scares me a little bit. But you make no mistake about it, I'm kind of with you. Those teams are trending. And then
Well,
there's
because
almost like a
frankly, like those four teams that you have up above them, they've done some things that really are scaring me too. So again, I don't know.
100%.
I love the way Wiggins played against Mississippi State for sure. Not, I thought he looked kind of terrible, frankly. But that defense is really, really good. I think the secondary is better than what we thought. And then LSU, I just like the way they're ascending. Like that defense, good Arkansas team in my mind. Like they gave some yards up, but they're playing better in the red zone. They're making more high impact turnover type plays. If they do that, their offense arguably the best in the country. I think you put them right up there with anyone. You don't think
I
so?
don't know.
Offensive line's
Like
great, weapons are great, Nussmeier's great. I don't know what else you want.
like where you put Nuss in like terms of the quarterback rankings, right? I think he's been solid. I don't know if I'm saying like this. Like I think there's a gap between where Miami's offense is and where this LSU offense is personally. You
Not a
don't think
big gap.
so?
No,
Well, I guess we're gonna figure out about this LSU offense playing Texas A&M on the
we
road.
will.
So we'll circle back to that conversation. Notre Dame, Indiana, rounding out the top 12 playoff teams. I think there's a little bit of gap, you know what I mean, between like Clemson, LSU, Texas A&M, gap, Notre Dame, Indiana. Notre Dame, I think they have figured out what they want to be. Like they want to run the football and play good defense. And Riley Leonard, although you have question marks about pushing the ball down the field, he can get it done with his legs. This Notre Dame team can run the football and they can play good defense. I just don't know if it's that brand for Notre Dame is making them super dangerous yet in the college football playoff picture. In Indiana, though we weren't sure what Indiana was going to be, and we said we'd find out against Nebraska. We found out. Like, Dill, it's the eyeball test, man. And like, I look at the roster and say this is not a top 12 roster. I look at the field and what I'm seeing throughout the first half of the college football season. Say this is a very good football team, getting good quarterback play, playing good defense. The playmakers on the outside are
Great.
legit dudes. Dill, like, we got to give some respect to the Indiana Hoosiers, man.
And I'll continue to be mystified by it, but it's almost really hard to argue now. We're
Yeah,
a little too deep into the season again. Like, have they played a top tier team from the Big Ten? No, but Nebraska's not a bad team. Now, I think that might have been a little bit more revelatory about what Nebraska might be,
you
frankly.
think?
Maybe because they got the piss beat out
Well,
of them. I mean, that
that's
wasn't
the conversation. Is like, was that or were we too high on Nebraska, or did Indiana just show us they're legit? That's the and at a certain point is like I was kind of dying on the hill. Like I got question marks about Indiana, question marks, and it's like I said, if they go out and beat Nebraska, that answers some question marks for me. I got to respect it. Putting Indiana as a college football playoff team.
because you are right. They execute at a high level. Like again, does it feel like the top end talents there at any
No,
position group? Definitely not. But I mean, Alabama's got top end talent. They're really, really good at spots, but they're not executing well. They're not
no.
in down to down, like making a ton of plays. Now, again, like could have that just been a one off for Jalen Milroe? Because that was first time I really thought he played poorly in a football game this year. Like maybe you could argue the South Carolina game, but I didn't hate that from him. He looked really bad against Tennessee, missed some very easy throws, looked a little bit like he did last year, but I still like debating them versus Notre Dame or Indiana. Like there still feels like there's a ceiling that
I
Alabama can
gotta
get to that is far higher than those two.
Agreed. 100% agree with that take. But that doesn't mean I'm going to rank them above them because what
But
Alabama's
they've
shown the
also
last
played it.
couple
I
weeks.
think they've played at that level
Yeah,
at
but you
times
have
during
to
the
do
season.
that's not good enough to like count for me to put them. Like, you got to do it more consistently than what Alabama's doing. Especially, what have you done for me lately? This Alabama team just has looked flat out not very good. Dill, before we move on to Alabama and dig into that third tier, Indiana team comp, the Cincinnati Bearcats from a couple of years ago under Luke Fickell, where it's like, I don't know if they have the talent to compete at the top of the landscape of college football, but they playing like it. Like that's kind of where I am with Indiana. Alabama, you kind of said it. I don't think we need to speak too much on it. Jalen Milroe, I don't know what happened because that kid was nails to start the season. I thought he was playing extremely well and took a step. That game of day, and I again give a ton of credit to Tennessee. That's a very good defense. He was missing those throws that he missed back in 2023 when he wasn't playing good. We hadn't seen him really miss those kind of throws early in the 2024 season. He's kind of back to that version, and we still have question marks about this Alabama defense. I thought Tennessee could have scored more points in that football game if they executed better in the first half. You got question marks, and you're kind of right. They got a ceiling that can win a national championship, but we haven't seen that ceiling since the first half of that Georgia game. Ole Miss, I'm high on them. And I don't feel like great about it. It's kind of similar to conversation to Alabama. This Ole Miss defense is so freaking good, and if this offense can figure it out, like they can wreck some teams. Like I don't know if they can make the college football playoffs with the two losses unless they really get hot. I think they'll get into the conversation, but they're going to have the ability to go toe to toe with anybody in the country with what they
See,
have
I
on the
think
roster.
I think like the BYU Iowa State fans are going to look at your little spiel on Indiana and be like, "Well, what about us?" Now, to
Well,
steal man your argument, like those two teams are playing down to the gun with some real bad teams, and they're
yeah,
doing it relatively consistently. So maybe you don't love that, but I look like, I mean, they're playing consistent ball. Like they're not playing consistently great football because they don't have great football in them either way. But I look like if you're going to talk about like loving Indiana for their consistency again, I have they shown great football yet?
no,
It's
that
hard to
I
know.
that totally disagree with that take. You look at how Indiana has played; they've boat raced every single team that they've played. Then you look at BYU and Iowa State. Iowa State had to go to the last minute against a very bad UCF team at home to win that football game. Their next best win on the schedule is a 1-point win against Iowa, who just lost by 2 scores to Michigan State. So one, they haven't really played that many good teams, and I know they're 6-0, and I'm giving them credit by putting them in here. But I look at Iowa State and say they haven't looked like Indiana to the eyeball test. Now, I have BYU over Iowa State, and I'm not sure why the AP poll doesn't. I think it's just because of the rankings they had to start the season. Look, BYU went on the road and beat SMU. BYU boat raced Kansas State. And again, that was kind of a funky game. I'd like to see that game get played again. But at the end of the day, like there's, in my opinion, no argument to have Iowa State over BYU because BYU's played better teams. I think have looked really good doing so. And then you have Kansas State, kind of that conversation that we've had with Alabama. The ceiling for Kansas State is higher than Iowa State and BYU, but it's been a little bit of a roller coaster for Kansas State. But this is a team that they're starting to put it together, and if they continue to put it together, they're going to be, at least in my opinion, the best team in the Big 12 with what Utah has been doing. Missouri, SMU, Boise State, rounding out the playoff dark horses. I'll give you my 30-second elevator pitch on each. Missouri, they got the talent to do so. We just haven't really seen it. I feel like we'll find out against Alabama this weekend. If Missouri loses that football game, I'm dropping out of the top 25 because they haven't looked like a top 25 team. I am putting them in there because I still think they have the capability of being a very good team. SMU, Kevin Jennings, they'll watch out. That is a pretty dang good offense and a defense that's not very bad. And they have a schedule. that I promise you, they'll be in the conversation at the end of November because of the schedule. And then Boise State, they're the best group of 5 team. We're going to see Boise State UNLV this weekend, which is going to be really, really fun. Got Boise State in there too. Thoughts on Missouri, SMU, Boise State?
Yeah, I'm honestly fine. Frankly, I think all those teams have like elements where there's like some legit high ceiling play. And that to me is important when you're like trying to compare them to like a Pitt or an Illinois, who I look like, yeah, those two teams execute at a really high level. They do the right things, they're playing well. But again, they're playing tight games with bad teams. They're finding ways to win. I don't think they have that like horsepower to go be really, really good. I look at SMU, Mizzou, and Boise State, like Ashton Genty, really, really special player, like about as special of a player as we see in college football right now. You look at Kevin Jennings, what he's doing and what he's given to that offense. Like that feels like an offense that can score on anyone. And then I mean, Mizzou, I'll say it until like I guess they just kill me with them. Like there's
Yeah.
still a lot of good play in that football team if they decide they're going to turn it up.
The boys there might just have to die on the Missouri sword, which we might be dying. We might be dying Saturday, but that's how this game in college football works. Dill, I think the one thing I'd mention with Boise State is like the one loss they have on the season was to the number 1 ranked team in the country on the road, and they gave Oregon and it was a quote unquote good loss. That college football playoff committee is going to be having a day with that good loss term. Illinois, Pitt, Army, Colorado, South Carolina, Illinois and Pitt. Like I feel like that's pretty fair. Army's playing really good football. You could throw Navy in there too, and we're going to find out about especially Navy playing Notre Dame this week. Though Colorado, it's a good it's a very solid football team. And
that loss now to Nebraska scares me bad because now I think you have some serious questions about Nebraska.
Fair enough. That is fair. Colorado changed their offensive line since then. The offensive line is just looking significantly better. But my story is like this defense is actually pretty dang good. Like that game on the road against Nebraska got out of hand quickly in that football game. I'm not saying Colorado, I'm focusing on Colorado and just kind of selling them. They have a different level of front seven than they did last year. Like this defense from a talent and depth standpoint, it's just different. Like they played UCF, was able to shut the run game down. Now you saw Kansas State get after them a little bit, but Colorado stormed back in that football game. This is not a very bad. This is a good Colorado team, and I really starting to believe in this team. South Carolina coming in as a top 25 team.
South Carolina can give anybody a really hard time in college football because when you have two defensive ends who are dominating the way they're dominating, and I don't want to like their defensive tackles are doing their thing too. So
yes,
up front, they can really dominate teams. They've dominated most teams they play, even like a really good LSU offensive line. I mean, I'd probably say South Carolina won that battle. So you look like that's a team that can go win that battle against anyone, and they can be a problem. Now, Lenore Seller's still making some of those really, really frustrating plays that lose you games, fumbling the ball against Alabama, that type of thing. But he is coming along a little bit. I really do like what they're doing with him. I think their offense is developing some ability to just consistently make plays. And it's not consistent yet, but like you see a drive here and there that you're like, the light might be turning on a little bit for that side of the ball. So I almost think South Carolina should be higher because I really do think that defense is so unbelievably good.
I don't think you can put them that much higher. You were saying the same thing with Arkansas last week, and I view these teams kind of similar. You're not sure what you're going to get from South Carolina from a week-to-week basis. But you look at the 3 losses. I mean, LSU played them very tight. Alabama played them very tight. Ugly one against Ole Miss. But you're kind of right. I'm picking South Carolina because that defensive unit, and I'd even give shout out to the secondary too. That defense is very, very good. And if that offense continues to find a stride, this is a very dangerous team in the SEC.
But I also look like when you say that you don't know what you get week to week out of South Carolina, I think there is an element you do know what you're going to get to week. It's just very inconsistent quarterback and offensive line play, which is a problem. But I look like if you stuck Illinois or Pitt into like the SEC, Illinois is probably not a great example because frankly, I think we know what we're getting with them. But let's say a Pitt or an Army or maybe even a Colorado, if you stuck them onto a field with good defensive lines and offensive lines every week, I think you'd see similar problems with all 3 of those teams because I look like, again, South Carolina, like when they play a team like Kentucky or something, and I know they beat up Kentucky, but they're not going to move the ball a whole lot against the Kentuckys of the world. They're just too physical up front. They're too good on defense. I think you'd see the same thing from Pitt, Army, and Colorado, frankly.
Yeah, I think that's fair. Yeah, I'm putting South
Because
Carolina in there because
Colorado saw that type of defense with Nebraska, and they really struggled to deal with it. And I get you can make some strides and some improvements, but can you make like totally 180
we're
improvements?
seeing LSU do that. We're seeing Texas A&M kind of do that. Like I think again, I feel like we're giving Texas A&M and LSU that like, oh, they're a different team. I've even said the same thing for Clemson. I
Could be
feel
fair.
that for Colorado. Like I think they're just continuing to get better. And the offensive Jordan Seaton is playing phenomenal football at the left tackle position. The front seven it's a top 60 unit in the country against the run. That is a stark difference between what we saw last year, and we all know what they can do at the quarterback position, the wide receiver spot. This Colorado, I think Colorado's a darn good football team. We'll cut it there. I'm sure there's gonna be plenty of hot takes in the comment section, and I encourage it. Like that, that's the beauty of doing this. Again, appreciate you guys rocking with it. If you made it to 26 minutes, we appreciate y'all. Subscribe to the channel if y'all do enjoy the content, and we'll talk to y'all later.